Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born as the reincarnation of Martian Manhunter. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, had always been a place of vibrant, overwhelming noise. It wasn't just the rumble of the elevated trains or the cacophony of chatter on the streets of Muzurifu. It was a noise beneath the noise, a silent symphony of feelings that washed over him from everyone he met. He didn't have a word for it. To him, it was just the way things were. A bright, sunny feeling from his mother when she baked his favorite katsudon. A prickly, staticky feeling from the grumpy man at the corner store. A brilliant, popping, explosive feeling of confidence from his best friend, Kaken. Today, however, the noise was different. It was muted, sterile. The air in Dr. Tsubasa's office smelled of antiseptic and old paper, a scent that felt gray and bland in his senses. The chair he sat in was too big, his feet dangling a foot above the polished linoleum floor. On the wall, a cheerful poster of a smiling, cartoonish DNA strand seemed to mock him. His mother, Inko, sat beside him, her hands twisted together in her lap. The feeling coming from her was a tangled knot of hope and anxiety, a low, nervous hum that made the back of Izuku's neck prickle. He reached out and took her hand. Her hum quieted slightly, replaced by a wave of warm affection that was as comforting as her hugs. Dr. Tsubasa swiveled in his chair, a large X-ray clipped to the light box behind him. The image showed a skeletal foot, and the doctor pointed a pen at the pinky toe. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," he began, his voice professionally gentle, "we've run all the tests. And as you can see from this X-ray, Izuku has 2 joints in his pinky toe. It's a fairly archaic indicator, a relic from pre-quirk research, but in 99% of cases, it's accurate." Izuku tilted his head, not understanding the words but focusing on the feeling behind them. The doctor's professional tone was a thin veneer over something else. It was a cold, smooth feeling, like a river stone. It was a feeling of finality, of a case being closed and filed away. "So, what does that mean, doctor?" Inko's voice was a waver, the nervous hum returning with a vengeance. The doctor let out a sigh, and the feeling that washed over Izuku was not sound, but a heavy, smothering blanket of pity. It was a terrible sensation, cloying and dismissive. It made Izuku feel small, not just in size, but in significance. "It means your son is quirkless." The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. Inko's breath hitched, and the tangled knot of emotion in her chest didn't just unravel. It shattered. A wave of pure, undiluted despair crashed over Izuku, so potent it felt like a physical blow. It was cold, sharp, and it stole the air from his own lungs. He saw tears well up in his mother's eyes, but he had already felt them coming, a salty tide of sorrow rising from the depths of her soul. "Oh, Izuku," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." He didn't understand why she was sorry. He just knew that the world had suddenly, irrevocably gone gray. The drive home was silent. The usual kaleidoscope of feelings from the people on the street, the rush of a salaryman late for a meeting, the placid joy of a woman walking her dog, the simmering anger of a driver stuck in traffic, was all just a blurry, meaningless static now. The only thing he could feel with any clarity was the vast, empty ocean of his mother's grief, emanating from the driver's seat. That evening, the rain began to fall, streaking down the windows of their apartment. Izuku sat in his computer chair, swiveling back and forth, watching the old video. All Might, his smile a sunbeam in the dark, carrying a dozen people from a burning building. "Fear not." "Why?" "Because I am here." The video usually filled him with a feeling of brilliant, soaring hope, a golden warmth that made him want to jump and cheer. But now, it felt distant, a light from a star that had already died. He could hear his mother in the kitchen, her movements slow, the feeling of her sorrow a constant, mournful hum throughout the apartment. He swiveled his chair around as she appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Izuku?" He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, tears finally blurring the image of his hero. The question that had been lodged in his throat since the doctor's office finally broke free, a tiny, desperate sound. "Mom, can I still be a hero?" Inko's face crumpled. She rushed forward, wrapping him in a tight hug, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry!" He felt her heart breaking, a visceral, shattering sensation that echoed in his own chest. He cried with her, not just because his dream was broken, but because her pain was his pain. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his 4-year-old dream, the silent noise of the world was nothing but a single, piercing note of shared agony. He didn't know it then, but this uncanny, overwhelming empathy was the first hint that the doctor's diagnosis was not just wrong, but catastrophically, fundamentally incomplete. 10 years passed. 10 years of being quirkless. 10 years of being Deku. The silent noise never went away. It only grew more complex, more nuanced. Izuku learned to live with it, to process the constant stream of emotional data as background static. He came to think of it as being overly sensitive, or uncannily perceptive. He never considered it a power. How could it be? It didn't let him lift heavy things or shoot fire from his hands. It just made the world a louder, more emotionally exhausting place. It made school a unique form of torment. He knew, with absolute certainty, when a teacher's praise was masking disappointment. He could feel the stinging embarrassment of a classmate who dropped their tray in the cafeteria, even when they laughed it off. He felt the secret anxieties of the popular kids and the lonely ache of the outcasts. It was a constant, draining deluge of feelings that weren't his own, forcing him to retreat into himself, to appear shy and mumbling because engaging with anyone meant opening the floodgates. And then there was Katsuki Bakugo. Their friendship had once been the brightest thing in Izuku's world. Kaken's emotional signature was a starburst of confidence, ambition, and a fierce, loyal protectiveness that Izuku basked in. But after Kaken's quirk manifested, the starburst began to change. A new element twisted into it, a sharp, brittle thread of arrogance. Then, after Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless, another feeling joined the mix, something dark and ugly. It was the cold, metallic taste of fear. Izuku could feel it, roiling under the surface of Kaken's explosive anger. Fear of weakness. Fear of being surpassed. Fear that Izuku, the pebble he was supposed to stand on to reach the sky, wasn't content to stay on the ground. "Get out of my way, Deku!" Bakugo would snarl, shoving him aside in the hallway. Izuku would stumble, but it wasn't the physical push that hurt. It was the psychic one. He would feel the spike of Bakugo's anger, a hot, crackling energy. But beneath it, he'd feel the cold dread that fueled it. He felt Bakugo's desperate need to prove himself superior, a need so profound it bordered on panic. The insults, the casual explosions that singed his uniform, the constant degradation, it was all a frantic attempt to silence that fear. Knowing this didn't make the bullying easier. In many ways, it made it worse. Izuku wasn't just a victim of a bully. He was the unwilling confessor to his tormentor's deepest insecurities. It was a horrifying intimacy he never wanted. His one refuge was his analysis. His notebooks. Hero analysis for the future. Became his sanctuary. Here, his strange sensitivity was an asset. When he watched videos of heroes in action, he wasn't just observing their fighting styles and support gear. He was picking up on the emotional resonance of their quirks, the psychic fingerprint they left on the world. He felt the pure, unyielding force of all might's will behind every punch, a feeling of absolute safety that calmed the crowds. He felt the cold, calculating fury of endeavor, a power that burned with ambition but offered no warmth. He could sense the subtle teamwork of a hero duo, not just by their movements, but by the harmonizing flow of their intent. This was why his analysis was so good, so eerily insightful. He wasn't just guessing at a hero's motivations or mindset. He was getting a faint, ghostly echo of it. He wrote it all down, filling page after page with observations that were part fact and part feeling, never realizing he was documenting the world in a way no one else could. On a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, the static of his life crackled and sparked into a full-blown storm. It started under a bridge on his way home from Aldera Junior High. The cherry blossoms were falling, painting the path in shades of pink. It should have been peaceful. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Bakugo's voice was casual, laced with a familiar sneer. He had just exploded Izuku's latest notebook and tossed it into the koi pond below. Izuku stood, head bowed, fist clenched, feeling the usual toxic cocktail of emotions from Bakugo: arrogance, irritation, and that deep, thrumming insecurity. Believe you'll have a quirk in your next life. Bakugo continued, a smirk playing on his lips as he and his cronies walked away. And take a swan dive off the roof. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. But it was the feeling behind them that truly broke him. It was a casual, thoughtless cruelty. A complete and utter dismissal of his existence. It was the doctor's pity from 10 years ago, sharpened to a razor's edge and wielded by the person who was once his closest friend. For a moment, the world went silent. The background noise of the city, the hum of emotions, everything just stopped. There was only the ringing in his ears and the cold, hollow cavern that had opened up in his chest. He eventually fished his notebook out of the pond, the pages soaked and bleeding ink. He walked on, his feet heavy, the cruel words replaying in his mind. Useless Deku. Quirkless Deku. Take a swan dive. He was so lost in his despair that he didn't hear the gurgling sound until it was too late. He didn't feel the shift in the atmosphere until a shadow fell over him. A voice, wet and menacing, slithered from the sewer grate. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, perfect. Izuku turned, and his blood ran cold. A monstrous being made of green, viscous sludge was rising from the manhole, its eyes and teeth floating grotesquely within its amorphous body. The feeling that emanated from it was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. It was pure, suffocating malice. A greedy, all-consuming hunger that had no room for any other emotion. It was a psychic void, a black hole of predatory need. Don't worry, the villain gurgled, lunging forward. I'm just going to take over your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. You'll be my hero. Izuku didn't even have time to scream. The sludge slammed into him, cold and slimy, forcing its way into his mouth and nose. It was like drowning in filth. He clawed at the gelatinous mass engulfing his face, his fingers sinking into it uselessly. Panic, sharp and absolute, flared in his chest. His lungs burned. Black spots danced in his vision. I'm dying. Mom. I'm sorry. I'm dying. His struggles grew weaker. His thoughts became sluggish, his body going limp. The psychic noise of the world was fading, replaced by the single, overwhelming sensation of the villain's malevolent presence. This was it. This was the end. A quirkless, useless end in a dark underpass. And then, something happened. As the last wisp of consciousness began to flicker out, a deep, primal instinct took over. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a fundamental rejection of oblivion from a part of him he never knew existed. The world went silent. The crushing pressure vanished. The suffocating feeling in his lungs eased. He could breathe, but there was no air. His eyes snapped open. The world was a murky, green-tinted blur. He was floating. Not in the sludge, but through it. He looked down and saw the villain's putrid liquid form inside his own body, passing through his torso as if he were nothing more than a projection. He saw the villain's frantic, floating eyes widen in confusion. Izuku felt no weight, no substance. His own body felt like mist, like a phantom limb. The sensation was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. It was alien. The moment was fleeting, a single, impossible second of dislocation. Then, solidity slammed back into him with a painful jolt. The sludge was crushing him again, the air was gone, but that 1 second had been enough. Have no fear, young man! A voice boomed through the underpass, a sound that Izuku knew better than his own name. Texas Smash! A gale-force wind ripped through the tunnel. The sludge villain was blasted apart, splattering against the concrete walls. Izuku was thrown to the ground, coughing and gasping, precious, clean air filling his burning lungs. He looked up, his vision swimming. There he was. All Might. In the flesh. His smile was blinding. Are you all right? The hero asked, his voice full of concern. He was already scooping the villain's remains into a soda bottle. A close call. But it's all over now. Izuku was in shock, his mind reeling from a dozen different things at once. The near-death experience. All Might standing right in front of him, and the memory of that bizarre, terrifying moment of intangibility. What was that? He thought he had imagined it, A hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. It had to be. He got his notebook signed, his inner fanboy temporarily overriding his trauma. In his daze, as All Might prepared to leave, a desperate, foolish impulse seized him. He grabbed onto the hero's leg just as he launched into the sky. The rooftop scene played out with the crushing weight of inevitability. The reveal of All Might's true form, a skeletal man wreathed in steam. The story of his injury, of his time limit, and finally, the words that were the final nail in the coffin of his dream. "It's not wrong to dream," All Might said, his voice heavy with a grim reality that felt so much colder than the doctor's pity. "But you need to be realistic. Without a quirk, you can't become a hero." Izuku stood on the rooftop, the wind whipping at his hair, the hero's words echoing in the hollow space in his chest. He was quirkless. A doctor had proven it. The #1 hero had confirmed it. But then, what was that feeling in the underpass? That moment of being smoke and shadow? Was it just a dying dream? A fantasy his brain cooked up in its final moments? It must have been. The alternative was too strange, too impossible to contemplate. He trudged down the stairs of the building, his feet like lead. Despair was a familiar cloak, but today it felt heavier than ever. He barely registered the distant sound of an explosion until he was back on the street. A crowd had gathered, pointing their phones towards a familiar alleyway. Fire, smoke, and chaos. Heroes were on the scene, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Backdraft, but they were all waiting. Izuku pushed his way through the crowd, and his heart plummeted into his stomach. It was the same villain. The sludge villain. All Might must have dropped the bottles. And it had found a new hostage. A hostage with spiky, ash-blonde hair and eyes wide with a terror Izuku had never seen before. Bakugo. The world seemed to slow down. The shouts of the crowd, the crackle of the flames, the frantic orders of the heroes, it all faded into a dull roar. The only thing Izuku could focus on was Bakugo, trapped in that same suffocating embrace that had almost claimed him, and for the first time, he felt Bakugo's emotional signature without any filter. The arrogance was gone. The pride was stripped away. All that was left was a raw, primal scream of terror and desperation. It was a feeling so pure and powerful it bypassed Izuku's ears and stabbed directly into his soul. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his, and in them, he saw a plea for help. In that instant, everything else ceased to matter. The doctor's diagnosis. All Might's lecture. Bakugo's years of torment. His own powerlessness. None of it mattered. A friend, a person, was in trouble. Before he even realized it, his legs were moving. He scrambled under the police tape, ignoring the shouts of the heroes. He was running, his worn red shoes slapping against the pavement. He had no plan. No quirk. He was a liability, a fool. But he was moving. As he ran, a new feeling burst from him. It wasn't a conscious thought, but a desperate, silent prayer that erupted from the very core of his being. Somebody. Anybody. Please save him. Help him. It was a psychic shockwave of pure, selfless desperation, a plea aimed at the universe itself. Miles away, standing in a crowd, the weakened form of Toshinori Yagi clutched his side, berating himself for his weakness, for letting the villain escape. He was at his limit, a husk of his former self. He couldn't transform. He couldn't move. But then, he felt it. A jolt. It wasn't physical. It was a surge of emotion that was not his own, a feeling of such pure, unadulterated heroism that it struck him like a bolt of lightning. It was the echo of his own creed, the very essence of a hero's heart, broadcasted back at him by some unknown source. It was the spark he needed. It was the reminder of why he'd chosen this path. It was a kickstart to his soul. His muscles tensed. Izuku didn't know any of this. He just knew he had to do something. His mind, honed by years of analysis, raced. The villain's eyes. They're solid. He swung his yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It soared through the air and struck the villain square in the eye. The creature roared in pain and surprise, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. A precious, vital second. It was enough time for Bakugo to gasp for air. It was enough time for Izuku to start clawing at the sludge, trying to free his friend. It was enough time for a skeletal figure to be consumed by a cloud of steam. "I really am pathetic," a voice boomed, resonating with newfound power. All Might had arrived, his body massive and his smile once again a beacon of hope. He grabbed Izuku, pulling him back as his other fist drew back. Detroit smash! The punch changed the weather. The sludge villain was atomized. The fires were extinguished. And then, the rain began to fall. The aftermath was a blur of scolding and praise. The pro-heroes admonished him for his recklessness while simultaneously commending Bakugo for his powerful quirk and tenacity. Izuku just stood there, soaked to the bone, trembling from adrenaline and shame. Bakugo stomped over to him later, as the sun began to set. "I didn't need your help," he screamed, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. "I was fine. You didn't save me. You got it? I don't owe you anything, you damn nerd." He turned and stalked off, his shoulders rigid. The words were harsh, the anger palpable. But beneath the volcanic rage, Izuku felt something else. A thin, fragile thread of reluctant gratitude, so deeply buried in shame it was almost undetectable. It was a clearer signal than any thank you could ever be. Izuku walked home alone, the world settling back into its familiar rhythm. His mind was a maelstrom. The near-death experience. The crushing despair. The reckless charge. The feeling of Bakugo's terror. The strange, impossible moment of intangibility. He unlocked the door to his apartment, his mother greeting him with a tearful, relieved hug. He ate his dinner in a daze, answered her worried questions with mumbled assurances, and finally retreated to the sanctuary of his room. He sat on his bed in the dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through his window. He replayed the day's events again and again, trying to make sense of the nonsensical. You can't be a hero without a quirk, but what if he had one? What if that moment of being smoke, of being a phantom, wasn't a hallucination? He held out his hand, staring at it intently. He concentrated, trying to summon that feeling of weightlessness, of dislocation. He focused on the memory of the sludge passing through him, trying to will his body to become intangible again. Nothing happened. His hand remained stubbornly, disappointingly solid. He clenched it into a fist, a fresh wave of frustration washing over him. It must have been a fluke. A one-time miracle, he sighed, letting his arm fall to his side. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of his window. The same plain, freckled face of a quirkless, useless boy stared back at him. The doctor was a professional. All Might was the #1 hero. They couldn't both be wrong. He absently touched his other arm, rubbing the skin. He half expected it to feel normal, just skin and bone. But it didn't. There was a strange sensation there, a subtle wrongness, like the memory of a limb that had fallen asleep. He ran his fingers over his forearm, an inexplicable dread coiling in his stomach. He pressed his fingers into his flesh, half expecting them to sink in, for his arm to dissolve into the mist he remembered. It remained solid. But the feeling of wrongness persisted. He stood up and walked to the full-length mirror on his closet door, flicking on the desk lamp. He stared at his reflection, truly stared, for the first time seeing past the familiar features. He saw the boy the world saw, Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless fanboy. But deep in his bones, in a place more ancient than his own consciousness, he knew it was a lie. A profound, fundamental lie. The doctor who felt of pity and finality. The strange, overwhelming empathy he'd had his whole life. The impossible moment of survival in the underpass. It all swirled together into a single, terrifying conclusion. He wasn't normal. He wasn't quirkless. He was something else. Something other. A cold fear, colder than the sludge, colder than despair, wrapped around his heart. He looked at his own reflection, at the stranger staring back from the mirror, and a single, earth-shattering question echoed in the silent chamber of his mind. What am I? The silence of his room was a liar. Izuku sat hunched over his desk, the glow of the monitor painting his face in stark, artificial light. Outside, the city of Muzurifu slept under a blanket of electric haze, but inside the small apartment, and inside Izuku's own mind, a frantic, sleepless storm was raging. The All Might posters lining his walls, once sources of boundless inspiration, now felt like the eyes of a pantheon he had betrayed. They were icons of a humanity he might not even belong to. The question, "What am I?" had become a festering wound in his soul. The logical, analytical part of his brain, the part that filled notebooks with meticulous observations, demanded an answer, a quirkless diagnosis. A moment of impossible intangibility. A heroic act born of pure desperation. The pieces didn't fit. They were from different puzzles entirely. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the frantic clicking the only sound in the room. He plunged into the deepest recesses of the internet, a desperate miner digging for a vein of truth. His search history became a chronicle of his escalating panic. Late-blooming quirks, stress-activated quirks, combined emitter/mutation quirk intangible. He waded through quirkology forums filled with crackpot theories and unsubstantiated anecdotes. He found stories of children whose quirks manifested violently during puberty, of individuals with multiple, seemingly unrelated abilities that were eventually traced to a single, complex genetic marker. There was hope in these stories. A strange, difficult, terrifying quirk was infinitely preferable to the alternative that was beginning to fester in the dark corners of his imagination. He found an article on Mirio Togata, a third year at UA High. Quirk, permeation. The ability to phase through solid matter. A jolt of recognition shot through him. This is it, he thought, his heart hammering, but as he read further, the hope curdled. Mirio's quirk made him blind, deaf, and unable to breathe while active. It was an all-or-nothing power that required immense skill to control. Izuku's experience had been different. In that murky, green-tinted moment within the sludge villain, he had been disoriented, terrified, but he could see. He had felt the villain's gelatinous form inside him. It wasn't the same. Discouraged, he changed his search terms. Telepathy quirks Japan, empathy quirks side effects. This led him down a different rabbit hole. He found information on mind-affecting quirks, most of which were heavily regulated. There was the infamous case of Hitoshi Shinso, a boy whose brainwashing quirk disqualified him from hero courses that relied on physical entrance exams. But that was vocal command, a form of coercion. What Izuku experienced was a constant, passive reception of raw emotion. It was less a tool and more a state of being. No article, no medical journal, no conspiracy forum described anything like the silent, unending symphony of feeling that had been the soundtrack to his entire life. He pushed away from the desk, a groan of frustration escaping his lips. The digital world had failed him. Research was a dead end. If an answer existed, it wasn't in the shared knowledge of humanity. It was inside him. He stood before the full-length mirror on his closet door, the same mirror where he had so often practiced All Might's smile. Tonight, the face staring back was that of a stranger, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, his usual wide-eyed earnestness replaced by a haunted, fearful intensity. "Okay, Izuku," he whispered to his reflection, his voice hoarse. "Okay. Just try. If it happened once, it can happen again." He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of his own frightened face. He tried to summon the memory of the underpass. The cold slime, the crushing pressure, the burning in his lungs. He focused on the absolute, life-or-death panic that had preceded his transformation. He tried to replicate that feeling, to trick his body into thinking it was about to die. Nothing. His heart rate increased, sweat beaded on his forehead, but he remained stubbornly, disappointingly solid. He was just a scared kid in his bedroom, hyperventilating in front of a mirror. Useless, he muttered, the insult a bitter taste in his mouth. It was Bakugo's word for him, but right now, it felt like his own. He opened his eyes, glaring at his reflection. The frustration was a hot, coiling thing in his gut. Maybe panic wasn't the key. Maybe it was something else. He had no control, that much was clear. His abilities, whatever they were a wild animal, and he didn't even know what kind of cage to build. He looked down at his hand, flexing his fingers. He had failed to become intangible. What if he tried something else? Not to become less solid, but more. In his analysis, he'd theorized about heroes who could alter their own biological density. It was a common application of enhancement-type quirks. He held his right hand out in front of him, palm up. He took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear and focusing entirely on the sensation of his own body. He thought about stone. About steel. He pictured his hand becoming heavier, denser, an immovable object. He focused all his will, all his concentration, on that single, simple concept. Change. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a strange, deep-seated pulling sensation started in his core, a feeling so alien it made him gasp. It wasn't a muscular contraction or a nervous twitch. It felt as if the very clay of his being was being remolded from within, tugged by invisible, expert hands. He stared, mesmerized and horrified, at his hand. The skin began to ripple. Not like a muscle flexing, but like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The pale, freckled flesh seemed to melt and flow, the color shifting. It started as a faint, sickly chartreuse before deepening, darkening into a rich, vibrant emerald green. It wasn't like paint or a trick of the light. It was a living, biological color, and as it settled, he could see a faint, almost imperceptible cross-hatching pattern emerge on the surface, like the skin of a reptile. He lifted his other hand, the normal, human one, and tentatively touched the green fingers. The texture was wrong. It was smooth, but with a strange, cool resilience, like polished leather. He had done it. He had controlled it. A bubble of terrified elation rose in his chest. It wasn't a quirk. Quirks didn't do this. This was a monster's trick. The shock of the realization, the sheer, unadulterated horror of seeing that verdant, inhuman hand attached to his own arm, shattered his concentration. Pain, a searing, agonizing pain shot up his arm as if it had been plunged into boiling water. The green skin writhed, bubbling and receding in a sickening wave. He cried out, clutching his arm as the familiar pale flesh reappeared, red and angry from the violent reversal. He stumbled back, crashing into his desk chair and falling to the floor in a heap. He lay there, gasping, his arm throbbing with a phantom agony. The pain was real, a clear message from his body. This is what you are. Do not fight it. And then the jolt. It was not physical. It was psychic. The shock, the pain, the raw terror of his discovery. It was a key turning a lock deep within his soul, a soul far older than his 14 years. The walls of his own consciousness crumbled. His room dissolved. The All Might posters, the desk, the bed, they were all gone, replaced by a sensory onslaught that brought him to his knees. The smell. Ozone and ash. The acrid scent of burnt earth on a planetary scale. And beneath it, something worse. The smell of burning mines, a psychic char that filled his non-existent nostrils with the stench of pure, refined terror. The sight. The sky was not blue, but a raw, bruised purple, ripped open by veins of sickly green light. 2 moons, one large and pockmarked, the other small and swift, hung in the sky like vacant, uncaring eyes. He was standing, no, floating, over a vast desert of rust-red dust. In the distance, the silhouettes of impossible cities, all graceful spires and delicate arches, were engulfed in unnatural, spectral green flames. A fire that didn't consume flesh, but sanity. A fire of the mind. The sound. There was no sound. There was only a scream. A single, unified, telepathic chorus of absolute agony that pierced the core of his being. It was the sound of a billion souls dying at once, a symphony of psychic anguish that had no beginning and no end. It was the sound of a civilization being erased from existence. The feeling. Searing, mind-numbing heat that had nothing to do with the green flames. It was a fever of the soul, a plague of madness and despair. It was a wave of grief so profound, so absolute, it was a physical force, pressing down on him, crushing him. And with the grief came a memory, sharp and clear as broken glass. The ghostly sensation of small hands, a wife's loving touch, a daughter's trusting grip, all slipping from his own grasp, dissolving into the psychic inferno. Names echoed in a mind that wasn't his, whispered on the psychic winds. Myria. Khm. The names were a fresh agony, a personal loss in an apocalypse of impersonal extinction, and a single, cursed word, the name of the plague, the fire, the end of all things, Hranmir. He was back. He was on the floor of his bedroom, curled in a fetal position. He was shaking violently, his teeth chattering. Cold sweat soaked his t-shirt. He could still smell the ash. He could still hear the faint, dying echo of the screams. He pressed his palms against his ears, but the sound wasn't external. It was inside his head. He scrambled away from the mirror, crab walking backwards until he hit the wall, his breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. That wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a memory of a red planet. A memory of a burning sky. A memory of a lost family. A memory of a dying race. It was not his memory. He sat there for what felt like hours, the terror slowly subsiding, replaced by a cold, crystalline certainty. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer scattered. They were assembled, and they formed a picture so monstrous he could barely stand to look at it. Intangibility. Telepathic empathy. Shape-shifting. A vision of a world with 2 moons being consumed by a psychic fire. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were a product of human evolution on Earth. This was something else. This was alien. The thought was so absurd, so utterly insane, that he almost laughed. A hysterical, broken sound bubbled in his throat. He, Izuku Midoriya, the ultimate hero fanboy, was an alien. It was the plot of a bad pre-quirk era sci-fi movie. He stumbled back to his computer, his movements stiff and robotic. His hands trembled as he typed, his search terms now guided by a terrifying new hypothesis. Alien archetypes, shape-shifting telepathy, fictional aliens, red planet, pre-quirk mythology, Mars. He bypassed the modern UFO conspiracy sites, the sensationalist blogs with their grainy photos and wild claims. He knew, instinctively, that the answer wasn't there. It was older. It was in the stories humanity told itself before quirks made the fantastical an everyday reality. He delved into digital archives, online libraries dedicated to preserving pre-quirk era media. He sifted through pulp magazines, synopses of forgotten films, and comic book databases. He found dozens of archetypes. The gray, bug-eyed invaders. The reptilian conquerors. The benevolent, godlike visitors. None of them fit. None of them felt right. Then he found it. Tucked away in a subfolder of an archive for a defunct comic book company called DC. The file was old, a low-resolution scan of a comic book cover from the 20th century. The art was garish, the colors lurid. A tall, green-skinned figure with a high collar and a red X on his chest stood heroically, his brow furrowed with solemn determination. The title, in bold, dramatic letters, read, Justice League of America. But it was the smaller text at the bottom that made Izuku's blood run cold. Featuring the Martian Manhunter, last of his kind, his heart felt like it had stopped. With a trembling finger, he clicked on a link next to the image, a simple text file labeled mm_char_bio.txt. The screen filled with plain, monospaced text. Real name, John Johns. Species, Martian, Green Martian. Homeworld, Mars, Malik Andra. Abilities, superhuman strength, speed, and durability, derived from Martian physiology. Flight, standard Martian ability. Shape-shifting, complete control over molecular structure, allowing for changes in form, mass, and density. Intangibility/phasing, ability to pass through solid objects by altering molecular density. Invisibility, ability to bend light waves around his body. Telepathy, capable of reading minds, broadcasting thoughts, creating psychic links, and projecting mental illusions. Considered one of the most powerful telepaths on Earth. Martian vision, projects powerful energy beams from his eyes. Weaknesses, vulnerability to fire, a deeply ingrained, psychosomatic weakness common to all Martians. Exposure to fire causes a loss of control over their form, intense pain, and psychological panic, reverting them to a primal, terrified state. This is believed to be linked to the final plague of Mars. Origin, John Johns is the last survivor of the Martian race. His people were wiped out by a psychic plague known as Ramirez Curse, or the Great Burning, a fire of the mind that was telepathically transmitted and drove the entire population insane before consuming them. John was accidentally teleported to Earth by a human scientist, where he was stranded, alone. He adopted a human identity and used his powers to become a hero and protector of his new home, though he is forever haunted by the grief of losing his wife, Mirai, and his daughter, Khm. Izuku read the text once. Twice. 3 times. It wasn't a character bio. It was his biography, the green skin, the intangibility, the telepathy, the overwhelming grief for a family he never met, whose names echoed in his soul. The plague of fire. Hranmir. Myraya. Khyam. It all fit. Every last, terrifying piece. He pushed his chair back slowly, the scraping sound loud in the deathly quiet of his room. He walked to the mirror, his legs unsteady. He looked at his reflection, but he didn't see Izuku Midoriya anymore. He saw a disguise. A perfect, fleshy, human mask. Freckles, messy green hair, wide green eyes, it was all a construct, a lie his ancient soul had unknowingly wrapped itself in. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy. He was a ghost. An echo. The reincarnation of John Johns, the last son of Mars, a dead alien living in the body of a human child. The existential vertigo was dizzying. Who was he? Was he Izuku, the boy who dreamed of being like All Might? Or was he John, the being who had lost everything in a psychic holocaust? Was his desire to be a hero his own, or was it the lingering duty of a long-dead lawman from another world? The horror began to recede, replaced by a fear that was far more immediate, far more practical. What would they do to me if they found out? He thought of the Hero Public Safety Commission, with their cold, calculating efficiency. He thought of government scientists in sterile labs. He wasn't a citizen with a rare quirk. He was an undocumented alien life form. An anomaly. A specimen to be studied. A weapon to be controlled. Or a threat to be neutralized. The world that celebrated quirks, that was built on the foundation of human potential, would not know what to do with him. He was an outlier that broke the entire system. He thought of his mother. How could he ever explain this to her? Hi, Mom. It turns out I'm not quirkless. I'm just the resurrected spirit of a Martian refugee, and your real son might not have even existed. The thought was a dagger in his heart. The pain it would cause her, the confusion, the fear, he couldn't do it. He would rather die than put her through that. He thought of All Might, the symbol of peace, the pinnacle of human heroism. How could he ever stand beside him, knowing that his own power came from a dead world millions of miles away? It would be a mockery of everything All Might stood for. The path forward became terrifyingly clear. His future, which had been a question mark just hours ago, now solidified into a cold, hard, lonely road. The secret was everything. John Johns had to remain buried. The Martian had to stay a ghost. The world could only ever know Izuku Midoriya. He looked at his reflection one last time, his gaze hardening. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a new, grim resolve. He would master these powers. He would learn to control the shape-shifting, to sharpen the telepathy, to command the phasing. He would do it in secret, under the guise of a newly manifested quirk. He would call it something innocuous, something human. He would walk the path of a hero. He would save people. He would smile to reassure them. He would do everything he had ever dreamed of doing, but he would do it while wearing a mask on top of a mask, a lie wrapped in an enigma. He would be utterly, completely alone, a solitary alien hiding in plain sight, haunted by the ghosts of a red planet. The weight of it all settled on his shoulders, a burden heavier than any star. But as he stood there, a strange sense of calm washed over him. He was a freak. A monster. An alien. But he was alive, and deep within his chest, beneath the grief of a Martian and the fear of a human boy, a heart still beat. And it beat like a hero's. The setting sun bled across the sky in hues of orange and violet, painting the concrete rooftop in the melancholic colors of a bruise. The wind was a lonely sound, whipping around the edges of the building and tugging at Izuku's scorched uniform. Every gust felt like a sigh from the city itself, a mournful exhalation for a dream that had died twice in one day. First, on this very rooftop, at the hands of the man who had inspired it. Second, in the lonely confines of his bedroom, under the weight of a truth more alien than any fiction. He stood before All Might, or rather, the man who was All Might. Tashinori Yagi. A secret self, a hidden truth. Izuku understood the necessity of it now in a way he couldn't have just hours before. The world needed the symbol, not the fragile man beneath it. In a strange, bitter way, they were kindred spirits, both hiding a profound, world-altering secret behind a carefully constructed facade. The difference was, All Might's secret was a weakness. Izuku's was a monstrous, terrifying strength. All Might had just finished commending him. The words, which should have been a balm to his shredded soul, felt like embers on his skin. You, young man, you are more of a hero than any of them today, All Might said, his voice raspy but sincere. When the prose were frozen, when I myself faltered, you, a quirkless boy, were the only one who moved. You acted because your body moved on its own. Because you saw someone in need. Izuku kept his head bowed, the praise a heavy cloak. He felt the sincerity radiating from the hero, a warm, golden wave of genuine admiration. It was a feeling he had craved his entire life, and now that he had it, it felt like a lie. Quirkless boy. The title was a brand, a label he was both trapped by and desperately needed to maintain. He thought of the silent, desperate plea he had broadcast from his soul as he ran towards Bakugo. The psychic shockwave of pure, selfless desperation. He hadn't known what he was doing, but now, with the knowledge of John's rattling in his skull, he had a chilling suspicion. Had that been him? Had that surge of heroic will that Toshinori felt, the one that allowed him to push past his limit, been a subconscious telepathic push from a terrified, resurrected Martian? The idea was nauseating. Had he puppeteered his own idol? The thought was a violation. And that is why I have come to find you. All Might continued, his tone shifting, becoming heavier, more deliberate. He stood taller, and even in his skeletal form, a sliver of the symbol of peace's gravitas returned. Young man, I have been searching for a successor. Someone worthy to inherit my power. Izuku's head snapped up. The wind seemed to die down. The city noises faded into a distant hum. Inherit your power? He whispered, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. Yes, All Might said, a plume of steam escaping his lips. He held up a hand, tracing lines in the air as if diagramming a grand legacy. My quirk is not one I was born with. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power, cultivated for the sole purpose of defeating evil. The name of this power. He paused, his gaze locking with Izuku's, imbuing the moment with a near-religious solemnity. Is one for all, one for all. The name echoed in the cavernous space of Izuku's mind. A power that could be given. A legacy. A human legacy. The ultimate hero's quirk, a power forged by mankind's collective will to do good. A doorway opened in his mind. A bright, shining, glorious exit from the dark, lonely path that stretched before him. He could accept. He could take this power and become the hero he always wanted to be. He would have a real, human quirk. A quirk he could explain, a quirk that would put him on the same level as his peers, a quirk that would let him stand beside All Might without the stain of an alien secret. John's and his red planet of sorrows could be buried forever, a bad dream he never had to speak of. He could be Izuku Midoriya, the ninth holder of One for All. He could be normal. He could be human. The temptation was overwhelming, a siren song promising acceptance and belonging. He could almost taste it. He saw a future where he stood tall at UA, his power crackling around him, a gift from his idol. A future where he didn't have to lie to his mother, where he didn't have to fear a simple bonfire, where the strange, silent noise of the world was just a memory. A future where he was whole. He looked at All Might, at the hope burning in the hero's sunken eyes. The man was offering him everything he had ever wanted, but as the temptation crested, another voice rose to meet it. It was not a memory of Mars. It was not the ghost of John's. It was quieter, more fundamental. It was the solemn, unwavering integrity of a Martian lawman fused with the earnest, pure-hearted stubbornness of a boy from Muzudafu. It was his voice. To accept One for All would be the ultimate lie. It would be a betrayal, not just of All Might, but of himself. He would be building his entire future, his entire heroic career, on a foundation of deceit. He would be taking a power meant for someone truly powerless, someone like the boy he had pretended to be his whole life, and claiming it for himself. He, a being with a wellspring of alien power dormant within him, a being who could potentially reshape his own body, read minds, and walk through walls, would be stealing the one chance a genuinely quirkless person had. It was a monstrous, selfish act. It was the act of a villain, not a hero. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had turned a shocking, vibrant green just hours ago. He thought of the phantom pain, the vision of a burning world, the psychic screams of a dying race. That was his truth. It was a terrifying, isolating, ugly truth, but it was his. To abandon it, to hide from it by taking on another's power, would be the greatest cowardice of all. He couldn't be a hero if he started by running away from himself. The internal battle was titanic, but brief. The moment the choice was framed as a matter of integrity, there was no choice at all. His shoulders slumped. The light in his eyes, which had flared with a moment of desperate hope, dimmed into a quiet, sad resolve. He took a deep, shuddering breath. All might. His voice was barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears. He bowed low, a deep, formal bow of profound respect and regret. Thank you? More than I can ever say. You're offering me the world. You're offering me my dream. He straightened up, forcing himself to meet the hero's gaze. The tears were there, clinging to his lashes, but his eyes were clear. But I can't accept. The words hung in the air between them, stark and absolute. All Might's hopeful expression faltered, replaced by a look of profound, utter shock. He seemed to shrink, the steam hissing from his mouth more rapidly. What? Young man, do you understand what I am offering you? This is a chance to become a hero. The chance you said you never had. I know, Izuku said, his voice shaking but firm. He clenched his fists at his sides, his knuckles white. The lie he was about to tell was a necessary one, a shield to protect his real secret, but it still felt like swallowing glass. I know, and I'm so grateful, but that power, one for all, it should go to someone who truly has nothing. Someone who is truly quirkless. All Might stared at him, baffled. But that's you! The doctor's diagnosis, your actions today, the doctor was wrong! Izuku interrupted, the lie tasting like ash. I think I might have a quirk after all. He held up his hand, the one that had transformed. He tried to summon the feeling, the deep, internal pulling sensation. He focused, not on the green color, but on something smaller, more subtle. A flicker, a ripple. He poured a sliver of his will into it, and for a half-second, a patch of skin on the back of his hand shimmered, the freckles seeming to blur and rearrange themselves before snapping back to normal. It was a tiny, insignificant parlor trick compared to what he knew he could do, but it was enough. All Might's eyes widened, zeroing in on the momentary distortion. It's new, Izuku stammered, building the fiction brick by painful brick. It only just happened. In the underpass. When the villain attacked me, I think the stress of it, the fear, it unlocked something. It's why I survived for that second before you got there. I think I became intangible. Just for a moment, he was weaving his reality into a more palatable narrative, sanding down the alien edges until it resembled something human. It's weak. And unstable. I can't control it. It's a strange, difficult one. He looked up at his idol, his expression a carefully crafted mixture of fear, confusion, and determination. If I can't even learn to be a hero with my own power, then I'm not worthy of yours. Taking one for all would be taking the easy way out. I have to try. I have to see if I can do it on my own first. Please, you have to understand. Silence stretched between them, thick with the unsaid. Tashinori Yagi stared at the boy, his mind reeling. He had come here prepared for tears of joy, for ecstatic acceptance. He had not, in any reality, prepared for a refusal. A refusal born not of fear or arrogance, but of a sense of integrity so profound it bordered on self-punishment. He looked at Izuku, truly looked at him. He saw the trembling hands, the tear-streaked face, the desperate hope warring with a stubborn, unbreakable resolve. He saw a boy who had been told his entire life that he was worthless, who had just discovered he wasn't, and whose first instinct was not to celebrate, but to shoulder the burden of his newfound power alone. A boy who would turn down the ultimate gift out of a sense of honor. In that moment, Toshinori saw a hero. He saw a heart as golden as any he had ever encountered, perhaps even purer than his own. The vessel he had chosen was worthy, more worthy than he could have imagined. So worthy, in fact, that he was refusing the power itself. The irony was staggering. A slow smile spread across Toshinori's face. It wasn't All Might's booming, confident grin. It was a quieter, more genuine smile, filled with a warmth that chased some of the chill from the rooftop. A small trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand. A strange and difficult quirk, you say? He mused, his gaze thoughtful. And you wish to master it on your own? Izuku nodded, his heart pounding. He had braced himself for anger, for disappointment, for dismissal. He was not prepared for this contemplative calm. That is the most foolish, reckless, and ridiculously heroic thing I have ever heard, All Might said, and then he laughed. It was not a boom, but a wheezing, rattling cough of a laugh that shook his entire gaunt frame. You have the heart of a true hero, Midoriya Izuku. Whether you wield my power or your own, that fact does not change. He stepped forward, placing a skeletal hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was surprisingly firm, a grounding weight. Then my offer changes, he said, his voice losing its formal, grandiose tone and becoming that of a teacher, a mentor. I will retract the offer of one for all for now. But I will make you a new one. A difficult quirk needs a guide. A young hero needs a teacher. You still want to get into UA, don't you? Izuku's eyes widened, a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill over. More than anything. Then let me help you, All Might said, his smile widening. Let me train you. Let me help you get a handle on this difficult quirk of yours. Let me guide you on the path of a hero, not as a successor, but as a student. Let me help you forge your own power into a tool for justice. The relief that flooded Izuku was so immense it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't been cast out. He hadn't been dismissed. He had refused the sun and, instead of being cast into darkness, had been offered a guiding star. The weight of his secret was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his gut, but it was no longer a solitary burden. He had an ally. An idol. A teacher. Tears finally streamed down his face. But they were not tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic gratitude. Yes, he choked out, bowing his head again. Yes, please. Thank you, All Might. Thank you. He was still lying. All Might had no idea of the true depth of his secret, the monstrous, alien nature of his abilities. But as the hero's hand squeezed his shoulder, a beacon of trust in the lonely twilight, Izuku made a silent vow. He would not betray this trust. He would work harder than anyone, push himself further, and become a hero worthy of the faith the symbol of peace was placing in him. He would live up to the lie, and in doing so, make it a kind of truth. He was Izuku Midoriya, student of All Might, wielder of a strange and difficult power. And that, for now, was enough. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the city in the gloaming. On a rooftop in Mizutafu, a new pact was forged. Not of a quirk passed down, but of wisdom, guidance, and a shared heroic spirit. It was the beginning of a new path, a path Izuku would walk under the watchful eye of his mentor, hiding a secret as vast and as cold as the space between worlds, all while striving to embody the very human ideal of a hero. The refusal had been the hardest decision of his life. It was also the first truly heroic act he had ever committed. The pre-dawn air over Dagobah Municipal Beach Park was thick with the smell of salt and decay. For years, the once scenic coastline had been an illegal dumping ground, a sprawling metallic graveyard where ocean currents had conspired with human neglect to create a landscape of rust and ruin. Mountains of discarded appliances, skeletal car chassis, and forgotten industrial debris formed a jagged, ugly skyline against the soft, gray light of the nascent morning. This was Izuku's new classroom. His new training ground. His new crucible. 10 months. He had 10 months until the UA entrance exam. 10 months to transform a wild, terrifying, alien power into something that could pass for a human quirk. Morning, young Midoriya! A voice boomed, startling a flock of gulls from their perch on a precariously balanced refrigerator. Izuku turned to see All Might, or rather, Toshinori Yagi in his buff form, standing atop the highest peak of garbage, his signature smile a brilliant white beacon in the gloom. He was a splash of vibrant primary colors against the muted tones of the junkyard. All Might! Izuku stammered, bowing quickly. Good morning, this place, All Might declared, gesturing grandly at the trash-strewn beach, is a stain upon this city's beautiful coastline. A testament to modern apathy, and for the next 10 months, it will be your personal gym. Your task is simple. He leaped from the peak, landing with a soft thud on the sand that barely seemed to register his immense weight. You are going to clean this entire beach, Izuku stared, his jaw slack. He looked from the hero to the seemingly endless vista of junk and back again. All of it, all of it. All Might confirmed, his smile unwavering. Your difficult quirk seems to be tied to your physical and mental state. It's versatile, but uncontrolled. We need to build your body into a vessel capable of handling its output, and we need to hone your mind to a razor's edge to command it. This is not just physical labor, my boy. This is an exercise in creative problem-solving and endurance. This is hero training, and so it began. The first few weeks were a brutal, humbling lesson in human frailty. All Might's regimen was relentless. Izuku hauled, pushed, and pulled debris until his muscles screamed in protest. He would come home every evening, his body aching in places he didn't know could ache, and collapse into bed, only to wake before dawn and do it all again. This was the foundation. Toshinori explained that any power, no matter how esoteric, was rooted in the physical self. A strong body meant a strong mind, and a strong mind was the only thing that could tame the beast Izuku was hiding. But this was not the same training All Might would have prescribed for a true inheritor of One for All. That would have been about building a vessel strong enough to contain a nuclear reactor. This was different. This was about teaching a phantom how to anchor itself to the world. All right, young Midoriya, let's see this quirk of yours in action again, All Might said one morning, a few weeks into the training. They stood in a small clearing Izuku had made amidst the junk. You said it's a versatile mutation/emitter type. Show me. Izuku nodded, his heart pounding. This was the performance. He had spent hours in the privacy of his room, practicing. He'd named his supposed quirk Eidolon, a name he plucked from an old dictionary, an idealized person or thing, a specter or phantom. It felt fittingly, painfully ironic. He took a deep breath, focusing on the internal, pulling sensation he was slowly learning to command. He started small, just as he'd practiced. I can alter my physical form. Minor things, mostly, he concentrated, and his messy green hair shifted, the color bleeding out to be replaced by a jet black. He blinked, and his irises swirled from green to a startling, electric blue. All Might watched, his expression unreadable, a thoughtful hum rumbling in his chest. Impressive control for a new manifestation, he commented. What else? This was the bigger lie. I can enhance my body. Temporarily. Izuku focused again, pushing more of his will into the transformation. His muscles seemed to swell, not to the comical proportions of All Might's form, but enough to add a visible layer of lean, defined muscle to his scrawny frame. His posture straightened, his height increasing by a subtle inch or two. This was his hero form. A carefully constructed human ideal, strong but not monstrous. It was a mask made of his own flesh. The process was draining, a constant, low-level hum of concentration required to maintain the shape. And this, Izuku said, taking a deep breath. He held up his hand and concentrated on density, just as he had in his room. His fists became visibly taut, the skin taking on a faint, almost stony sheen. He walked over to a rusted, dented washing machine and punched it. The sound was not the dull thud of flesh on metal, but a sharp, resonant crack. A perfect, fist-sized crater appeared in the side of the machine. All Might's eyebrows shot up. Density manipulation? Remarkable. That's a high durability on its own. The combination of shape-shifting and enhancement is incredibly rare. You weren't kidding when you called it difficult. It's a powerhouse. Izuku let out a shaky breath, releasing the density shift. The strain was immense. He was learning that these powers, John's powers, were like muscles that hadn't been used in millennia. Every use was an agonizing combination of rediscovery and raw effort. The training evolved. It became less about simply moving trash and more about using his abilities to do it. "That refrigerator is too heavy for you to lift in your base form, yes?" All Might would say, pointing to a massive, industrial-sized unit half buried in the sand. "But perhaps you don't need to lift it. Think, my boy. A hero's greatest weapon is his mind." Izuku would struggle at first. He tried to brute force it in his enhanced form and fail. Then, defeated, he would remember. He didn't have to play by human rules. He would close his eyes, focus on that feeling of dislocation, of becoming smoke, and phase his hands into the refrigerator. The sensation was still deeply unsettling, a violation of the natural order. His hands would pass through the cold, rusted metal as if it were air. He would find the solid compressor unit inside, grip it, and then resolidify his hands, giving him a perfect internal handhold. From there, he could drag the heavy object out of the sand with far greater ease. Other times, All Might would stand on a high pile of debris and simply start throwing junk at him. Old tires, chunks of metal, broken chairs. "Dodge!" the hero would yell, a wide grin on his face. Izuku's first instinct was to scramble away. But that wasn't the point. The point was control. He had to stand his ground, track the incoming projectile, and at the last possible second, allow a localized part of his body to become intangible. A rusty pipe would pass harmlessly through his shoulder. A CRT monitor would fly through his torso. It was a terrifying, high-stakes game of chicken that slowly, painstakingly, honed his reflexes. He learned to phase not just his whole body, but individual limbs, small patches of skin. He learned to exist in two states at once. The telepathy, however, was a secret he kept locked away even from All Might. He couldn't explain it. There was no human corollary for the constant, low-level hum of emotions he picked up from his mentor, a deep, paternal pride mixed with a heavy, secret sorrow for his own waning power. To reveal that he could feel these things would be to reveal his alien nature. So he bore the psychic noise in silence, framing his uncanny insights as simple. Good observation, but his mental shields, the ones he was subconsciously building, were getting stronger. The training helped. The intense physical exertion and focus required to move the junk gave his mind an anchor. It was a way to tune out the static of the world and focus on a single, tangible task. The psychic noise of Mizurufu, which had once been a roaring ocean, was slowly becoming a manageable tide. He was learning to build a dam in his own mind. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows across the now noticeably clearer beach, All Might decided they were done for the day. "Good work, young Midoriya! You've cleared nearly a third of the beach. We'll celebrate with a small meal." He produced a couple of bento boxes and used a small, controlled puff of air from a finger flick to ignite a pile of driftwood Izuku had collected. A small, cheerful bonfire crackled to life, casting a warm, dancing glow on their faces, and Izuku's world ended. The sight of the flames, the way they writhed and twisted, the hungry, consuming sound they made, the sharp, pungent smell of the burning wood, it bypassed his conscious mind entirely. It was a key sliding into a lock deep in the oldest part of his soul. The screams returned. Not a memory, but a fresh, vivid experience. The psychic chorus of a billion souls burning in a mental inferno. Hranmir. The fire was not hot. It was a cold, sanity-devouring plague. He felt his skin crawling, not with heat, but with a phantom psychic fever. He saw the face of his wife, Mirai, her features contorted in silent, telepathic agony. He saw his daughter, Khyam, reaching for him, her form dissolving into green, spectral flames. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, a boy on a beach in Japan. He was Johns, the sole survivor, watching his world die all over again in the heart of a tiny, harmless campfire. Arg! A raw, animal cry of pure terror was ripped from his throat. He scrambled backwards, away from the fire, his hands flying up to shield his face. He fell, kicking and thrashing in the sand as if trying to beat out invisible flames that were consuming him from the inside. His body began to flicker, his human form destabilizing. Patches of his skin shifted to green and back again, his limbs seeming to melt and lose cohesion. He was a glitching image, a being caught between two realities. Young Midoriya! Izuku! All Might was at his side in an instant, his buff form gone, replaced by the gaunt, worried face of Toshinori. He grabbed Izuku's shoulders, trying to steady him. The boy was slick with a cold sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that was not of this world. It burns! It burns! Izuku shrieked, his voice raw with a grief and fear that was 1,000 years old. Toshinori, his mind racing, did the only thing he could think of. He scooped up handfuls of sand, smothering the bonfire until the last ember was extinguished, plunging the beach back into the cool twilight. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku's thrashing subsided. The flickers of green faded. He was left curled on the ground, shaking uncontrollably, his breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. He was just a boy again, a terrified 14-year-old who looked like he had just seen the end of the world. Toshinori knelt beside him, his expression grim. He had seen fear. He had faced villains who weaponized terror. But this was different. This was not a simple fear of being burned. This was a deep, instinctual, soul-level phobia. It was as if fire itself was a predator that hunted the boy's very spirit. "It's okay, my boy," Toshinori said, his voice soft. "It's gone. The fire is gone." Izuku didn't respond for a long time. He just lay there, shivering in the cool night air. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know what happened." The lie was weak, pathetic, but it was all he had. Toshinori didn't press him. He simply sat with him, a silent, comforting presence until the shaking stopped. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was part of the boy's difficult quirk. It wasn't just a collection of powerful abilities. It came with a crippling, psychological weakness. A fatal flaw. A hero who was terrified of fire. In a world of villains like Endeavor, or even Bakugo with his explosive quirk, it was a death sentence. "We will work on it," Toshinori said, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. "This fear, it is a part of your power, and like any other part, it can be controlled. It will not be easy, but we will face it together." From that day on, the training changed again. Every evening, Toshinori would light a single candle and place it at the edge of their training area. At first, Izuku couldn't even look at it. He would work on the opposite side of the beach, his back to the tiny, flickering flame, his entire body tense with repressed panic. But slowly, day by day, Toshinori moved the candle closer. He would talk Izuku through it, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm of the boy's inherited trauma. He taught him breathing exercises, grounding techniques. He had Izuku focus on the reality of the flame, the heat, the light, the chemical reaction. He was forcing the human, analytical mind of Izuku Midoriya to override the ancient, terrified instincts of John Johns. It was torture. Every session left Izuku drained and shaking, his nights filled with nightmares of green flames and screaming ghosts. But he never gave up. He trusted All Might, and he knew, with a grim certainty, that he had to conquer this. He had to cage the Martian's grief if he ever hoped to be a human's hero. By the 10th month, the beach was pristine. The last piece of trash, a rusted, hulking freezer, was hauled away by Izuku, his body now lean and strong, a testament to months of grueling labor. He stood on the clean sand, the morning sun warming his face, and watched as Toshinori recorded a video of him on his phone, a triumphant yell echoing across the waves. That evening, for the first time, Izuku was able to sit just a few feet away from their small bonfire. His hands were clenched, his body was still tense, but he didn't run. He could feel the heat on his skin and smell the wood smoke, and while the ghost of the psychic screams still whispered at the edge of his hearing, he could distinguish them from the sound of the crackling wood. He could separate the memory from the reality. He had faced down the ghosts of Mars, and if he hadn't won, he had at least fought them to a standstill. "You did it, my boy," Toshinori said, looking from the clean beach to Izuku's determined face. "You are ready." Izuku looked at his mentor, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. He was a liar. A freak. An alien hiding in a human shell. But Toshinori Yagi had looked at him, and seen a hero. He had taken a broken, terrified boy haunted by things he couldn't possibly understand, and he had forged him into something stronger. He had given him the tools not just to fight villains, but to fight the monster within himself. As he prepared to leave, Toshinori turned to him, his expression serious. "There's one last thing, young Midoriya. Yue's exam is a practical one. You will be fighting robots. Your abilities, they are subtle, intangibility, minor shape-shifting. They are not flashy. You will need to show the judges what you can do. Do not be afraid to be creative. Show them the mind of a hero, not just the power." Izuku nodded, a new, steely resolve settling over him. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless fanboy anymore. He wasn't just John Johns, the grieving survivor. He was something new, forged in the junkyard of Dagobah Beach, shaped by the hands of the symbol of peace. He was a hero in training. And he would prove it. He would walk into that exam, control his alien heritage, and show them all that a hero's true power lies not in his fists, but in his heart, even if that heart once belonged to a man from Mars. The air inside Yue's main auditorium buzzed with a kinetic, nervous energy that was a physical assault on Izuku's senses. He sat wedged between a boy with 6 arms and a girl with vine-like hair, trying his best to reinforce the mental shields he and All Might had spent months building. It was like trying to soundproof a room during a rock concert. The ambient psychic noise was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of fierce ambition, crippling anxiety, arrogant pride, and desperate hope, all churning together into a muddy, exhausting psychic sludge. He pulled the collar of his tracksuit up, sinking lower in his seat as if he could physically hide from the emotional deluge. On stage, the voice hero, Present Mike, was screaming, "Welcome, one and all, to my live show! Everybody say hey!" A dead silence met his enthusiastic cry. Izuku flinched, not at the silence itself, but at the wave of collective, second-hand embarrassment that washed over him from the hundreds of other examinees. It was a potent, cringe-worthy feeling. "Tough crowd," Izuku muttered to himself, scribbling a note in the small notepad he'd brought. Present Mike, vocal quirk. High decibel output. How does he avoid damaging his own ears? Specialized support gear? Or a secondary mutation for inner ear protection? The psychic resonance of his voice is loud. All confidence, no subtlety. A battering ram of sound. He was using his analysis as an anchor, a familiar mental exercise to focus his thoughts and filter out the distracting noise. It was the intellectual equivalent of humming to himself in a haunted house. Present Mike explained the practical exam. They would be fighting 3 types of villain robots in a massive, simulated urban environment. Points would be awarded for destroying them. Simple. Straightforward. A test of raw power and combat application. A tall, well-dressed boy with dark blue hair and engines coughing out of his calves shot to his feet, his hand chopping the air with rigid precision. "Sir, on the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame upon a prestigious institution such as UA." Izuku felt a spike of earnest, rule-abiding indignation from the boy, so sharp and pure it was almost comical. The boy then swiveled, his arm now pointing directly at Izuku. "And you, with the messy green hair, you have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." The spotlight of 100 pairs of eyes fell on him. A wave of irritation and annoyance from the surrounding students washed over him. He felt his face flush hot with embarrassment. The boy's accusation was correct. His muttering was a nervous tic, a side effect of the constant mental processing he was forced to do. He sank even lower in his seat, stammering an apology. Present Mike calmed the boy. Tenya Ida, Izuku would later learn, and explained the 4th robot. The zero-pointer. A massive, arena trap, worth no points, designed to be avoided. A gimmick. An obstacle. Izuku's analytical mind immediately latched onto that. No points? Then its purpose isn't combat. It's a test of something else. Resource management? Risk assessment? Evasion? Why waste resources on a non-scoring element unless it measures a different, equally important heroic quality? He underlined the word avoid on his handout 3 times. As they were herded towards the massive gates of Battle Center B, Izuku spotted a familiar figure. A girl with a round, cheerful face and a permanent blush on her cheeks, was standing near the gate, looking incredibly nervous. She was taking deep breaths, her hands clasped together. Izuku could feel the waves of anxiety rolling off her, a feeling he knew all too well. He remembered her from the school entrance. He'd tripped over his own feet, and she'd used her quirk to stop him from falling, her touch leaving a strange, weightless sensation on his arm. Zero gravity. He started to walk over to wish her luck, to offer a word of encouragement. It was the heroic, John-like instinct to soothe and reassure. But then the tall, blue-haired boy Ida appeared at his side, placing a rigid hand on his shoulder. "She appears to be trying to focus," Ida said, his voice a low, serious reprimand. "Are you attempting to interfere with another examinee's preparations?" Izuku recoiled as if burned. The boy's intent wasn't malicious, but his self-righteous certainty was like a psychic slap. Defeated, Izuku backed away, his own anxiety spiking. He needed to focus. The performance was about to begin. He stood before the towering gates of Battle Center B, a sprawling, concrete metropolis waiting on the other side. This was it. The culmination of 10 months of sweat, pain, and fear. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, calming breath. He let the ambient noise of the other students fade away, focusing his mind inward. He began the transformation. He reached into the core of his being, to the alien template of John Johns, and began to reshape his human form. It was no longer a painful, uncontrolled process. It was practiced. Deliberate. He pushed his will into his muscles, making them denser, harder. His frame broadened slightly, his height increasing by a precious few inches. He felt the familiar, low-level strain of maintaining the enhanced form, a hum of energy that was now a familiar companion. This was the version of himself he would show the world. This was Eidolon, in its combat state. Strong, capable, but still fundamentally human in appearance. And start! President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers, but Izuku was already moving. While the other students stood around in confusion, Izuku shot off the starting line like a sprinter from the blocks. He had felt the subtle shift in President Mick's intent a split second before the hero spoke, the mental gathering of breathe before the shout. It was a minuscule head start, but in a test like this, every second mattered. "What are you waiting for?" President Mike yelled at the bewildered crowd. "There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go!" The herd of examinees finally surged forward, but Izuku was already deep inside the city, the sounds of his competition fading behind him. The urban landscape was eerily silent for a moment before the first robot appeared. A one-pointer, a sleek, green machine on a single wheel, zipped around a corner, its single red optical sensor locking onto him. It raised a small laser cannon. Izuku didn't charge it head-on. That would be a waste of energy. Instead, he ducked behind the corner of a building, breaking its line of sight. He pressed his back against the cool concrete, quieting his breathing. He extended his senses, not his sight or hearing, but his strange, passive telepathy. He couldn't read the robot's mind. It was a machine, a psychic blank, but he could feel the faint, telltale vibrations of its presence, the hum of its internal machinery, the displacement of air as it moved. He waited. The robot rounded the corner, searching for him. In that instant, Izuku acted. He pushed off the wall and, instead of punching it, he leaped onto it. He landed on its chassis, his sneakers finding purchase on the smooth metal. As the machine tried to buck him off, he drove his right hand forward. He didn't aim for the outer shell. He focused his will, his intent, and activated his intangibility. His hand plunged through the metal casing as if it were water. The sensation was cold, invasive, a deep violation of physics. He felt the complex tangle of wires and processors inside. His fingers brushed against a hot, vibrating power conduit. He solidified his grip. Then he ripped his hand back out. He came away with a fistful of sparking, severed cables. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It coasted to a halt, emitting a sad little puff of smoke before collapsing onto its side. 1 point. He didn't pause to celebrate. He was already moving, his head on a swivel. 2 more one-pointers and a 2-pointer, a bipedal machine with more armor, rolled into the intersection ahead. They opened fire, peppering the street around him with laser blasts. Izuku didn't try to tank the hits or outrun them. He became a ghost. He pushed his intangibility to its limit, his entire body flickering into a semi-translucent state. The laser blast passed harmlessly through his shimmering form. He ran straight through the barrage, the beams of light feeling like nothing more than faint warmth against his phantom skin. The sight must have been bizarre for any observer, a boy running through a hail of laser fire as if it wasn't there. He reached the first one-pointer and repeated his earlier trick, phasing his hand inside and tearing out its guts. As the second one turned to face him, he did something different. He focused on his left arm, willing it to change. The limb elongated, stretching like taffy, the sleeve of his tracksuit stretching with it in a surreal display of unstable matter. His arm shot out, covering the 10-foot distance in an instant. His hand, still in its dense, stone-like state, slammed into the robot's optical sensor, shattering it completely. The two-pointer was a bigger problem. It was bulkier, its armor thicker. He couldn't just punch through it. So he adapted. He leaped towards it, and as it raised its arms to swat him away, he phased straight through its chest and out its back, landing gracefully behind it. Before the machine could turn around, he targeted its legs. He didn't need to destroy the whole thing. He just needed to disable it. He focused his density-shifting power into his foot and delivered a powerful, precise kick to the robot's ankle joint. The sound of shearing metal was horrifically loud as the joint buckled, sending the large robot crashing to the ground, immobilized. 5 points. He continued like this for the next several minutes, a phantom flitting through the battlefield. His style was not explosive or flashy. It was quiet, efficient, and deeply unsettling to watch. He used his low-level telepathy to get a sense of where other examinees were, avoiding their brawls and kill-stealing. He felt a huge, explosive psychic signature and knew to stay away. It was Bakugo, turning entire city blocks into his personal fireworks display. He felt the cold, precise feeling of expanding ice and gave that area a wide berth as well. That had to be the Todoroki boy he'd read about. His chosen method was ambush and surgical strikes. He would use his shape-shifting to camouflage himself against the graffiti-covered wall, the patterns of his tracksuit and skin momentarily mimicking the colors of the paint, letting a patrol of robots pass by before striking from behind. He would stretch his legs to trip up a fleeing three-pointer, then phase his hand into its main CPU. He was racking up points at a steady, efficient pace. 28, 29, 32. He was doing well. He was proving he could be a hero, but he felt a gnawing emptiness in his chest. This was just pest control. He was destroying machines. He wasn't saving anyone. The judges, Nizu, Aizawa, and the others, watching on their monitors, were undoubtedly perplexed. What is the nature of that boy's quirk? Aizawa Shoda asked, his voice a tired monotone. He leaned forward, his tired eyes squinting at the screen showing Izuku's exploits. Shape-shifting, intangibility, enhanced strength and density. They seem like 3 distinct high-level quirks. A multiple manifestation? It's sloppy, but effective. It's more than effective, it's tactical. Nizu, the principal, countered, his beady eyes gleaming with intelligence as he sipped his tea. He's not wasting any energy on flashy takedowns. He analyzes, disables, and moves on. Minimal property damage. Maximum efficiency. But he's isolating himself. He's shown zero interaction with any other candidate. As if on cue, a new wave of emotion flooded Izuku's senses. It was a spike of panic, sharp and clear, from a few blocks over. It was the same anxious energy he'd felt from the gravity girl at the gate. He changed course immediately, his own objective forgotten. He leaped to the rooftops, his enhanced legs carrying him across the gaps between buildings with ease. He bounded across the cityscape, a green-clad specter closing in on the distress signal. He arrived to see her in trouble. She was cornered by 2 three-pointers, her face pale. She was touching the robots, and they were floating harmlessly into the air, but the effort was clearly making her nauseous. She was swaying on her feet, a hand pressed to her mouth. She couldn't keep it up for much longer. Izuku didn't announce himself. He dropped from the rooftop behind one of the robots. As it turned, alerted to his presence, he drove his fist forward, his arms stretching again, and slammed his hardened knuckles into its head, deactivating it instantly. The other robot, now free from her gravity, began to fall. The girl, Ochako Uraraka, cried out in alarm, but Izuku was already moving. He leaped into the air, met the falling machine, and phased his entire body through it, landing on the other side as it crashed to the ground behind him. Uraraka stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "Wow, thank you! You were amazing!" Her psychic signature was a bright, warm wave of relief and admiration. It was so open and honest it almost took him aback. It's no problem," he stammered, his combat focus momentarily broken. "Are you okay?" "A little queasy," she admitted, giving a weak smile. Releasing the float gets bleh. Before he could respond, the ground began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the concrete canyons of the mock city. A shadow fell over them, vast and absolute. Both of them leapt up, and up, and up. The zero-pointer. It was colossal. A mechanical titan that towered over the tallest buildings, its massive form blocking out the sun. Its head was a single, glowing red eye, and its fists were the size of buses. It moved with a slow, inexorable purpose, its massive treads tearing up the asphalt as it advanced. The sheer scale of it was an act of psychological warfare. This was the obstacle, the thing they were meant to run from, and everyone was. From his vantage point, Izuku could sense them. A mass exodus of examinees, a psychic wave of pure, unadulterated panic as they all scrambled to get away from the giant robot. That was the smart move, the logical move. Then he heard a small, pained cry from beside him. He looked down. Uraraka had been knocked over by the initial tremor. Her leg was trapped under a large slab of concrete, dislodged by the robot's advance. She was trying to push it off, her face strained with pain and panic, but it was too heavy. The zero-pointer's massive shadow crept over her. Its single red eye swiveled down, locking onto the small, trapped figure. Its huge arm began to raise, preparing to bring its fist down in a crushing, indiscriminate blow. Time slowed down. The roar of the robot, the distant shouts of the other students, the frantic thumping of his own heart, it all faded into a dull background hum. All Izuku could see was the girl, helpless and terrified. All he could feel was her spike of fear, a silent scream that resonated deep in his soul. And in that moment, the ghosts of Mars rose up within him. He saw Miraya and Kchwam, not in a fire, but under the shadow of an unstoppable force. He felt the crushing, absolute failure of a protector who could not protect. The grief and rage of a billion souls cried out in his own. The analytical mind of Izuku Midoriya, the student who had underlined the word, avoid 3 times, was completely and utterly submerged by the heroic, sacrificial instinct of John Johns, the Martian Manhunter. He would not fail again. He would not stand by while someone was crushed. He looked at the towering robot. Punching it would be like punching a skyscraper. Tearing out its wires would take too long. He had no way to damage something that massive from the outside, so he wouldn't fight it from the outside. "It's okay!" he yelled to Uraraka, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I've got this!" He bent his knees, pouring every ounce of his will into his legs. He wasn't just enhancing them, he was channeling John's innate ability for flight. It was an ability he had barely touched, one that felt profoundly alien and difficult. But now, driven by sheer, desperate need, it answered his call. He didn't just jump. He launched. He shot into the air, a green and white blur rocketing straight up, leaving a small crater in the pavement where he'd stood. The wind shrieked past his ears as he ascended, 50 feet, 100, 200. He flew straight towards the zero-pointer's massive, impassive face. The robot's eye tracked him, its internal targeting systems classifying him as a minor, fast-moving threat. It swatted at him with a hand the size of a house. Izuku didn't dodge. He held his course, and at the last possible second, he went intangible. The massive metal hand passed through his phantom form. He was inside the robot's palm for a terrifying, disorienting second before emerging on the other side. He was now face to face with the giant, glowing red optic. He didn't hesitate. He flew forward and phased through the optical sensor, plunging into the darkness of the robot's head. Inside, it was a cathedral of machinery. Thick bundles of cables as wide as his torso ran along the walls, all converging on a central processing unit that glowed with a malevolent red light. This was the machine's brain. He solidified, his feet landing on a metal walkway. He was inside the beast. Now to kill it. He began his work with a cold, desperate fury. He didn't just rip out a few wires. He became a force of destruction. He used his stretched limbs to tear down entire cable racks. He phased his hands into junction boxes and solidified them, shattering the delicate electronics within. He increased his density and smashed through coolant pipes, venting pressurized gas and great, hissing clouds. He was systematically, brutally, tearing the machine apart from the inside out. The robot on the outside began to shudder. Its glowing eye flickered. Its massive arm, poised to strike Uraraka, froze mid-swing. It began to tilt, its internal gyroscopes failing. Izuku had to get out. He found the main optic again, phased through it, and emerged back into the open air just as the giant machine began its slow, grinding fall backwards, away from Uraraka. The judges in the observation room were on their feet, their mouths agape. Did he just fly? One of the teachers stammered. He phased inside it. Aizawa said, his voice stripped of its usual boredom, replaced by something akin to awe. He took it apart from the inside. Mizu was practically vibrating with excitement. Oh my! Oh, this is very special indeed. Not a brawler. Not a powerhouse. A saboteur. An infiltrator. What a wonderfully heroic and terrifyingly practical mind! In the air, Izuku's victory was short-lived. The adrenaline faded, and with it, his fragile control over the alien power of flight. He tumbled out of the sky, a helpless ragdoll falling hundreds of feet towards the hard pavement below. He saw the ground rushing up to meet him, and a grim thought flashed through his mind. I saved her, but I broke myself. A fitting trade. But then he heard a sharp slap. And the sickening feeling of falling was replaced by a gentle, floating sensation. He looked over and saw Uraraka, her leg now free, one hand stretched out towards him, her fingertips glowing faintly. She had used her quirk to save him, just as she had at the school gates. Release! She cried out, her face pale with nausea, and he fell the last 10 feet, landing in a heap on the ground, bruised and exhausted but alive. The klaxon sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay on the pavement, his enhanced form melting away, leaving him feeling small, weak, and utterly spent. He had 32 villain points. It might not be enough, but as he looked over at Uraraka, who was being tended to by Recovery Girl, he knew he didn't care. He had earned 0 rescue points on the official scoresheet. But he had earned one that mattered. He had acted like a hero. He had faced an impossible obstacle and overcome it not with brute force, but with calculated, alien logic. He had shown the judges a sliver of what he could really do, and it had been enough. He didn't know it yet, but his bizarre, efficient, and ultimately selfless performance had not just earned him a place at UA High. It had placed him squarely on the radar of everyone who mattered, marking him as the greatest and most fascinating anomaly to ever walk through their gates. The boy with the ghost of a Martian in his heart had just announced his presence to the world.